It was occupied. Okay. I did. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Hello. Thank you very much for being here. The good news is that this was a very popular meeting, so I'm happy to see so many people. This is more people than we expected, which is a good thing. I apologize that we don't have enough room for everyone. We did originally want the community room, which I hear is bigger, but it was not available this evening, so I do apologize for that inconvenience. We will try to go quickly through the formal part of the presentation, and that way we can quickly get into the questions and answer period. We do have some comment forms that we will pass around for anyone who can't stay the whole time. We do have some sign-in sheets that I will try to pass around, and if you want to put down your name and address, that would be great. You don't have to. And with that, we're going to get started. My name is David Elder, and I'm a manager of the Office of Strategic Planning and Projects at the Connecticut Department of Transportation. I am one of the project managers of this corridor management plan. The Connecticut Department of Transportation has over 15,000 lane miles of state highways that pass through one of the 169 Connecticut municipalities. This particular corridor, the Route 146 corridor, is unique among many of those 15,000 miles in that it does pass through two very, it is a scenic, designated scenic highway, both at the local level and as well as the state, and it is also its own recognized National Historic Place registered with the Connecticut Historic Registrar. So that makes it a very important corridor, and as such, what we're doing, we are obligated, because we receive federal funding. In fact, 80% of all of our funding that comes to the state of Connecticut for transportation comes from the federal government. We sign an agreement every 2 years with the federal government that says how we're going to maintain our roadways. That means we're going to maintain it to a certain standard for safety. We're going to maintain it to a certain lane width. We're going to make sure that in terms of a crash analysis that we're meeting federal standards. It goes all the way down to guide rails and clear zones. And so what we wanted to do, because we are going to be doing projects on the Route 146 corridor, we're working with both municipalities. We do have a corridor working group. And we are working with both municipalities because over the next 10, 15, 20 years, we're going to need to upgrade the facility, maintain the facility, and we're going to need to do so in accordance with the federal standards. However, knowing that this is a unique corridor, we want to make sure that the improvements that we undertake have as least a negative impact on the natural character, the scenic character that we can while still meeting the federal guidelines. So with that, we have initiated a corridor management plan. It's a 15-point plan. It is codified through USDOT's Federal Highway Administration. We have VHB as the consultant project manager who's also leading the project from the consultant side. And I'm going to turn it over to Dan Amstutz in a minute. I do want to take a minute and acknowledge a member of the Corridor Working Group. This is our second public meeting, but we do have a Corridor Working Group, which is made up of members of both municipalities as well as some other state agencies. And so I would like to acknowledge Carol Lee just to say a few introductory remarks, and then followed by First Selectman Matt Hoy after Carol Lee.
Everybody's here. Everybody wants to hear something besides me, so I'm going to go real quick. I want to welcome you all on behalf of all of us who were working for the last year on this corridor management plan. And I want to just suggest to you that the website is fabulous. So what you don't hear tonight, you should really try and find out the answers to on the website. And then if you don't still know what the answer to the questions is, you should get in touch with those of us who are on the committee, and our names are on the website. They include people from both towns, and it includes environmentalists, people who are interested in bicycles, people who are interested in town government, that is to say representatives from engineering and environmentalists, deep, preservation, lots of us. Lots of it, different perspectives. So why is this important? Well, for one thing, a corridor management plan is an interesting thing. It took the committee about 3 sessions to figure out what it was that we were actually doing. And the consultant and DOT kept saying, no, that's not it. Well, then what the heck is it, right? It's an interesting entity, plan, that actually doesn't tell you what to do. It asks you what you think you want to do. What are your important issues? What are the possibilities to solve those issues? It's really a fascinating thing. So I encourage you. I just want to say, for the sake of David Elder, that as an environmentalist, I've spent a lot of my professional life in a difficult relationship with DOT, often. And now I'm converted. I don't know if it's because I've aged to the point where I no longer want to fight anybody, or whether, in fact, it is, as I suspect the case, that DOT has grown up along with me. So, have a good night.
Thank you very much, Carol Lee. I appreciate that. First Selectman, please.
Thank you all for being here tonight, and I would also like to extend my apologies for the cramped nature of where we are this evening. But for those of you who are aware of the name, Sarah Tuxis has the bigger room tonight for one of their exercise classes, and they've had access to that room for quite some time. So take your coats off. Let's make sure we get comfortable. I'm going to ask Todd Rake to make sure that we turn the air conditioning up here so you're comfortable. Carol Lee, thank you very much for your remarks. But more importantly, thank you very much for your and the balance of the committee's representation of our communities and our community's interest in this process. Your remarks are wonderful from the perspective that we often are skeptical of big organizations, but you've just illuminated something that they're willing to move, and I think we can get consensus and we can get something that we'll all be proud of and we'll all be able to get behind at some point. So thank you for everyone for your participation, your interest, and let's get on with the show, because I'm the least interesting guy in the room right now.
Thank you very much. A few just housekeeping items. The Connecticut DOT does have a civil rights policy. No person shall, on the basis of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation or subject to discrimination in the development of this project. There is a voluntary post-meeting survey. It is voluntary. You can see the URL on the screen in front of you, and there is a barcode that we can also make available too at the conclusion of the meeting. A public notice is that the Connecticut Department of Transportation operates its programs and services without regard to race, color, or national origin in accordance with the Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Any person who believes he or she has been aggrieved by any unlawful discriminatory practice under Title VI may file a complaint with Connecticut DOT. That office is with, you can reach the office at 860-594-2169. Or you can email deborah.goss@ct.gov or visit our administrative office at 2800 Berlin Turnpike, Newington, Connecticut 06131. For more information, visit www.ct.gov/DOT. We do have a slide before I introduce Dan Amstutz. We anticipate a presentation of probably 35 to 40 minutes. We're going to try to go quickly through it because we do have folks standing and it is warm. But we don't want to go so quickly that people don't understand or follow along. And then we do have a question and answer period. So we will try to go quickly, but we also don't want to take too much of a shortcut. So we do a disservice to the effort. So with that, Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, David.
Is the presentation also on the website? Is this the only place we'll be able to see it?
We'll put the presentation on the website. It's not up there just yet, but we've got a documents page on the website where we will place it. Along with the handouts that you have, there's sort of the major handout that we have over here. We still have a few left. I printed 75. I thought it would be enough. I was clearly wrong. There are still a few left over here that goes over the strategies that we're going to talk about a little bit later. But that we'll also get that on the website as soon as we can. So thank you everybody for coming. We appreciate you taking your time out this evening to come, and again, apologies for the crampedness in the room, but as David said, we'll try to move things through. Since I think a number of people didn't come to the first meeting that we had on April 25th, we're going to just take just a couple minutes to review what is the corridor management plan, just to go over that very quickly, what we've done since the last public meeting, which is on April 25th, and then really spend most of the time on the future strategies and get into the Q&A so people can ask more about them and get out what you want to know. So the corridor, Route 146, is 13 miles. We have the map on the screen, but I also have it printed out in large format here on the board that you can come look at later. And it goes from green to green, basically from Brantford Town Green near Route 1. And as you see, it travels a little bit. There's a yellow line. It travels through Brantford and goes down to the shore and then continues to the east and sort of travels through the sort of more rural part of the town before it gets into Guilford and continues off the east. We have little icons on here that show there's lots of scenic vistas. There's lots of really pretty environmental features, water features that you see there. There's bridges. There's historic architecture that's part of it as well. And so it's a very important and unique corridor. It's a state scenic highway for almost all of the 13 miles. There's several national historic districts that it runs through, as David mentioned. There's one just for Route 146 itself that's partly in Brantford and partly in Guilford. It's a very unique and historic road. I think we all know this. It connects Brantford and Guilford and the coast of Long Island Sound. There's lots of wildlife habitats, historic homes, tidal marshes, and scenic views, as I mentioned. So, and a lot of varying land uses. It's a pretty narrow road, and it also crosses a number of railroad underpasses where the Amtrak rail line goes. And then we know that there's been a lot of flooding issues as a coastal highway. So these are just some of the things that we know about the road. But what is a corridor management plan that we're doing here? It's different from a corridor study that was started a few years ago that was kind of stopped after we did the existing conditions report, which I'll mention in a minute. It's really more of taking a step back, more of a big picture planning document that really looks at, well, what is the land in the community that the road travels through? What is unique about it? It focuses on, how can we maintain this road? How can we make certain improvements to the road that may need to be made for safety while still really protecting those unique qualities, historic and environmental qualities that makes it really special. But the point of the plan is also to really guide that future, any of those future projects, to sort of bake in these important things of protecting and preserving the roadway that we all know is very important. And we provide strategies. We're going to talk more about strategies later that get into like what can be done, what maybe should be done to, again, preserve and protect the corridor, but giving a guiding recommendations. And there's also extensive community engagement. This is our second public meeting. We've had a corridor working group, as we mentioned, and we'll also have a public survey later on. There was a corridor management plan done for 146 and 77 in 1996, and it focused also on preservation, a lot of similar themes: lowering traffic speeds, improving bike pedestrian access, reducing impact of development. Those have all come up again. And again, there was a corridor study that was started, but during that process, it was determined that it was better to go back to this corridor management plan instead as a preferred route to really talk about what should be done for Route 146. And so we started this corridor management plan about a year ago. It has these goals of increasing safety, again, involving the community, having extensive community engagement, improving bike pedestrian access, trying to balance all of these different goals within the strategies themselves to say how can we help serve all these things, again, while also looking at preserving and protecting the roadway. So since the April meeting, we gave an overview very similar to what I just showed of the corridor, what's happened, what sort of existing conditions on it, updated, and the public comments we received a lot of really good comments from that meeting. Flooding is a major issue, we recognize. Pedestrian bicycle safety came up to the top as another main issue. Reducing speeds has come up as a major issue as well. There's concerns about there's quarry truck traffic, sort of goes along with the reducing of speeds, but also very strongly the need to preserve the roadway, again, while still providing a safe road for everyone. So we've done field work, we've done mapping, we collected additional traffic data, we looked at the corridor characteristics to understand them better from the context, reviewed the corridor management plan previously to understand more how that speaks to managing the corridor, and understanding these different pieces of it, collecting data on locations of guide rails and different features that are there on the corridor that are transportation-specific features, and also did some additional traffic collection because we had collected data in February 2023. We needed to collect some data during the summer as well because that's when we had previously collected data, and we collected it on a couple of new locations at Medland Farms in Brantford and also 444 Leeds Island Road, where there was a crash. What's going on here? There was a crash about a year ago, a bicycle crash. And so because these were locations where the police department had identified as being high-speed locations, which we did confirm that there's very high speeds over the speed limit at those two new locations that we collected. We also did a lot of stakeholder interviews over the summer. So these eight stakeholder interviews, 8 areas around economic development, active transportation, environmental issues, transportation safety, water and flooding. So we talked to different groups, different organizations within the towns, and committees that work on these different issues. And the basic takeaway, a number of takeaways from that is that there is really a need to engage with Amtrak on the bridge constraints at those locations where the train goes over the road are very significant. And, you know, it may be a long time before something changes, but we need to engage the railroad now. We only had one active transportation group, but most of the groups that we talked to, whether they looked at economic development or flooding, they were concerned about bicycle and pedestrian safety as well. And so that sort of comes up as, again, a major theme here. There are a number of intersections that people were concerned about that we've recorded here in Brantford and Guilford. Again, speeding concerns, flooding, noting where those flooding locations are was important. It's a recreational, there's transportation, but there's also recreation, not just walking and biking, but also fishing and boating that happens. And a lot of discussion about the shoulders on the road, that they need to be better visible for people to bike and walk on, but also for general traffic safety. And then there's a bit of a tension between trying to preserve these historic qualities versus trying to make changes or improvements for safety, but also addressing flooding and also pressure from developments that may be occurring. Part of what we're doing is we'll also be looking at 8 different locations where we're going to look at showing constraints in existing, what's happening now, or what's out there right now, to see, sort of representative locations of what kinds of issues that are out there, what kind of conditions that we need to be aware of. Oh,
Is it okay if I move this back? Okay.
okay.
Will you pick up that quarter, please, Dan? Sorry, everyone. Thank you. All right. You're welcome. All right. I think that's the best we're going to do tonight. So feel free, if you're waiting, come on in. We'll be alert if someone needs to switch, and maybe someone sits down for a little bit and the other one stands. I assume we can all figure that out. Sorry, Dan. I apologize
That's
for interrupting.
okay. That was actually a good stopping point. So,
Excuse me, the gentleman sitting from the piano, move over to right from the speaker.
okay. So we're getting a few more people in here, getting some more chairs on here. So we're getting to the meat of why we're here tonight is really to talk about these strategies. Now, we do have them up on the screen, but we're going to move through them a little bit quickly. There was, as I mentioned, there was a handout which had all the strategies on it. I printed a 75 for the group, so many people should have them. I'm not sure if there are any more left. But again, we're looking at strategies and not necessarily recommendations to do a specific thing in a specific place. So these are a way to really approach future transportation projects, to incorporate these specific goals that we have for the corridor, and to say this is the direction that we want to take, that we need to take, but again, while also understanding that we want to, again, preserve and protect the corridor, the scenic vistas. How do we do that and make sure that that becomes part of the conversation and part of the strategy, the approach that we're taking? So there won't be specific projects that are in here, but more of directions to say this is the sort of action that we want to take, that we understand from all the conversations, the meetings we've had, the public comments, and they may, something to address an existing issue, but also future conditions such as sea level rise. So we're trying to preserve the corridor while enhancing safety. These are potential strategies that we've come up with. Again, we've done field work, interviews, public comments, discussions with the DOT and their staff, our own professional judgment as transportation professionals, but it's also extensive input from the corridor working group, as we've talked about. And we've combined everything here to say what are the potential strategies that we're looking at. And they come under these 7 different themes. So there's the overall strategy framework and goals, preserve and protect the unique intrinsic qualities of the Route 146 corridor in the Branford and Guilford. And the themes go over flooding and sea level rise management, bike and pedestrian access and safety, speed management, roadside safety, intersection safety, maintenance enhancements, and environmental and historic preservation. And so we will have a document that will be up on the Route 146 website, which will have a link to it at the very end of the presentation, where we'll have this document up where you can read all about it. But we will also go over them very briefly. We understand flooding is really a frequent occurrence. It happens in certain areas, whether it's storms, sometimes in high tides and heavy rainfall, and it is predicted to get worse. We did look back and see if our flooding analysis, which we'd done a few years ago, had changed, and nothing's really changed so far in what's predicted, 20 inches of sea level rise over the next 20 years. And also understanding that with the corridor management plan, we're not necessarily looking just at the road, but also what's outside of the road, and that there may be, it's important to also work with the adjacent property owners along the road and the towns to see where there may be flooding that may be coming in from outside of the road as well. And again, I won't read through all of these, but in general, we're talking about reviewing the flooding areas for what are the contexts in those specific areas. We understand that Route 146 is an evacuation route as well, but how can it be used as an evacuation route if it's also flooding? So are there other ways that you could get people out of the coast and out to Route 1 or use other existing roads? Again, it's just reviewing it and seeing what's possible out there, not specifically identifying which road to use. We've got water bridges and culverts where we have issues, and also the railroad underpasses sort of have their own unique aspect to them because there's flooding underneath them, but again, those will not change for likely a long time, but we have to start working with the railroad now. Bike and pedestrian access and safety, there's sort of a variety of land uses. It goes from green to green, as I mentioned. Different parts of the road may call for different strategies, not necessarily sidewalks everywhere or bike lanes, but it will be different if you're trying to accommodate folks in the more rural parts of the corridor. The town greens, will have different needs than the lower density areas, but Connecticut DOT also has a more recent policy that just came in force where they have to consider including bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure in future road projects. And again, reviewing connectivity, these are the main strategies. Reviewing connectivity where we could make those connections for people biking and walking, where we might need to make alternative routes if there really isn't a good way to accommodate somebody on the road in a particular place, if there's another way to get around, although some places may not have it. Again, reducing vehicle speeds is very important. We have a whole strategy on that. Looking at the pavement shoulder space, and then evaluating the railroad underpasses, again, for bike and pedestrian access. Speed management is another major theme. The Office of the State Traffic Administration actually approves the speed limits, and they're actually updating their process so that they can look at different things like contextual and land use elements that we can look at a target speed, which is a little different from the way that it's usually looked at now. And traffic calming devices are being tested on state roads, such as raised crosswalks. So these things aren't completely out of the question for a state route like 146. And also automated speed enforcement is another new thing that has come up. There's new legislation that allows in some instances if it's adopted by the municipalities. So, we're looking at working with your local traffic authority, usually your police department, on the speed limits, looking at traffic calming measures where they might be appropriate along the corridor, and then looking at reviewing applicability of this recent legislation about automated speed enforcement. Roadside safety, it's a lot about barrier protection, about how do you keep people from running off the road. So something like guide rails. So a lot of the current guide rail that's on the road is not up to standard and would likely not stand up to a crash if somebody ran into it. There's been discussion about the Merritt Parkway guide rail, but it's really designed only for that roadway and wouldn't necessarily hold up under the coastal conditions where the road is located. But that doesn't mean the only thing that's available is the W-beam barrier protection that everybody knows, the sort of a standard conduct guide rail. There's other things that can be used if they need to replace a guide rail, something called box beam rail, which is the top picture right here, which is being used on other scenic highways in Connecticut. There's a cable guide rail with steel posts. You can see on the bottom, again, it's stronger, but they have different needs for how much space they need behind them and how much space they need to actually install them. And there may be other alternative guide rail that can be used in the future. Again, just noting that we understand that the W-beam is not preferred for this scenic highway, but there may be other things that can be looked at. And then it's even possible to develop a roadway-specific guide rail for 146, if that was a desire. Intersections, again, came up. The Condot traffic would need to be involved in looking at intersections, identifying issues at the specific intersection, and then potentially speed management would be part of this. So there's just one strategy here, just reviewing these different intersections, especially that are of concern to the different towns. Maintenance has come up, again, has a big issue. We have to understand that this is a shared responsibility. Connecticut DOT will maintain the right-of-way, but there may be things beyond the right-of-way regarding scenic vistas that that need to be, that the DOT would not be able to go and address. They do perform mowing along the roadway twice a year, but they don't have a permit to do invasive plant management. That has come up a little bit in terms of the Phragmites and the other invasive plants that are there, but they don't have a permit to really do that as a part of their general maintenance. There are larger projects where that could involve invasive plant management. Sometimes with transportation projects with mitigation, they may be able to include an area where they could do some of that. But one of the issues is that the right-of-way line of what the DOT actually needs to maintain isn't, there is some mapping that's missing from that, so that would need to be confirmed for the corridor. It's potential to work with the local Condot maintenance office to get different kinds of maintenance enhancements potentially, but also understand that when it comes to maintenance, it includes maintaining those historic and unique environmental features like rock outcroppings, ledge, and historic walls. These things are actually, and mature trees are protected or get additional protection through the scenic road legislation, so that that those need to be, if those were removed or changed, those need to be approved by the commissioner. So those are, again, that's part of the whole corridor and what makes it unique are these different features. But also working more with DEEP, with the Connecticut DEEP, to look at improved invasive plant management. And then the last one that I have, the last strategy theme, is environmental and historic preservation, of course. These natural resources, the scenic vistas, the historic nature of the corridor, it really makes up a lot of the intrinsic quality of it. So the state scenic road does, again, being a state scenic road, does give it additional protections and additional review if there is a change. And also the towns, have zoning subdivision regulations that can help protect that as well, help protect historic character, or through design review boards as well. There may be more that the towns could do in order to help protect the roadway in particular, or the corridor, or the properties adjacent to the corridor. There's also a Scenic Roads Advisory Committee in Branford and Guilford that it was started after the creation of the previous corridor management plan that could be revitalized to help put focus on the corridor and put focus on trying to implement these strategies to move forward with them. So that is everything at this point. We could go to Q&A. So there, again, a lot of the detail is in the document that I think most people got. It's about 7 pages front and back, so really 14 pages. So it's lengthy, but it gives you really all the detail that I just talked about. And then the schedule, we're planning to do a public survey later on, refine the strategies from the public survey and also from comments from this meeting or comments from the corridor working group. And then the idea is to finalize the corridor management plan by next spring. And then, of course, we would have another public meeting to talk about reviewing the final plan. So we are now at the Q&A portion.
I would say, so just a reminder, so we are not, this is not a public hearing, so we are not going to record verbatim all of the comments, but we do want to get a sense of what questions people have. We want to answer as many as we can. If you have a very specific question, maybe there's a curb, you live on the road, we may not be able to answer that question tonight, but we will certainly take your name, and if you have a contact information that you're willing to give us, we will try to get back to you. But just by one other housekeeping item, if you do want to ask a question, you do need to come up to the podium. We do not have a microphone that we can hand around. And because of that, just out of curiosity, could I have a sort of show of hands of who thinks they might have a question already? And don't worry, we can add to this list. I just want to get an idea. All right. And also, if you know someone in the room and they've said something and you agree with their comment, it's perfectly acceptable for you to come up and say, I agree with, what Donna said. So we will be keeping track of what people have to say. So with that, I think we'll start with maybe just folks in the back first. If you have a show of hands, maybe if someone in the back, sir, if you want to just come up. And also, if you could just try to keep your comments and your questions sort of brief, 2 or 3 minutes at first to let everyone have a chance to ask, and then we can come back to folks if they want to say more. If you could just say your name, please, and that's enough. Just watch your step, please. Thanks.
I'm Jonathan Katz. I'm here on behalf of the Sybil Creek Place Homeowners Association. We live at the urban Branford end of Route 146. It is a heavily used pedestrian area which connects downtown Branford to what's known as the Indian Neck entertainment area. Think Lenny's and you're there. There are no sidewalks and there are difficult curves. Fortunately for us, there are no railroad underpasses. There was a river to cross. DOT is just about to fix that. We would like to know how we can get this urban piece to the top of the pile. The Branford Police want it because they recognize the dangers of pedestrian traffic at all hours of the day, particularly in the summertime. This one strikes me as easy from an engineering standpoint and consistent with your connectivity and pedestrian management bicyclist safety goals.
All right, thank you very much. Yep. So one of the things we are aware of is that, you can sit, you're welcome to stay back here. One of the things we are aware of is that the corridor that we're looking at is a 13.9 mile corridor, and within those roughly 14 miles, it does change. So we have some more urban areas and some more rural areas. So what we're hoping to come up with through this plan is to identify different what we call cross sections. So where might we be able to accommodate a sidewalk? Where are what we call low-hanging fruit? So this might be one of the low-hanging fruit. It might be an opportunity for a sidewalk. There might be other areas in the corridor that a sidewalk would be more challenging and maybe it's not feasible. But we are looking at the corridor, realizing that it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. There might be one option at one point in the corridor that's not available somewhere else. So thank you very much for that comment. We will make note of that. Thank you. Yes, please.
I just wanted to support what Jonathan has just commented on.
Okay, thank you very much. What was your first name?
Susan Flynn.
Susan, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Watch your step, please.
Dr. Alexander Hoffman, you've listed a bunch of different things. Does the plan prioritize the kinds of different things you listed? Does it prioritize strategies? Clearly, you alluded to some potential tensions between available space and speed and other things. Do those issues get addressed here, or are those things that are hashed out down the road? Sorry for the pun, that was unintentional.
No, that's okay. So no, and anyone on the project team can correct me. Anyone on the working group can correct me as well. There are some members of the working group. But no, this plan is not going to get into prioritizing one of the strategies over the other. I think that from a practical perspective, we're going to be faced with looking at transportation improvements as they come up. So we might have to replace a culvert first, which means some of these strategies are going to be applicable to that type of a project. Or we might end up with a sidewalk project first, which means we might be struggling with, looking at, preserving the existing right-of-way versus expanding it to accommodate a sidewalk. So no, we do not intend to prioritize one of the strategies over the other. We think that we're going to be faced with those decisions organically as the road needs to be improved over time. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's Paul Hermes. I live in Guilford. You mentioned the automated traffic control. I assume those are speed cameras that you're referring to. So I'm sure those are controversial, and right, and I'm sure half the people in the room would hate them and half would like them. But if they're legal now, we could probably impact the safety of that road today by putting them in place. What's the possibility? I guess my question is specifically around that. What's the possibility of doing something today or very soon? And maybe the side question is, are there immediate things that that we could be doing that would have high impact? And is that sort of part of the plan?
Yeah, so the electronic speed enforcement, you're exactly right. It's a contentious issue. I believe the statutes currently, and if there's anyone in the room who knows better than I do, there actually might be some folks in the hallway that know better than I do. But it's the state enabling statutes were passed this last session. However, it is up to each municipality to adopt ordinances to allow the municipality to place speed enforcement cameras on any road within the municipality. The DOT, the Office of the State Transport, OSTA, the Office of the State Traffic Authority, or Office of the State Traffic Administration, is currently developing draft ordinances and draft guidelines for speed enforcement, but it does need to be adopted at the municipal level before they can be put in place. But it has been proven to be a very effective strategy for speeds across the country and internationally as well. In terms of more immediate improvements, we are looking at the option of some what we call countermeasures to combat speeding. We heard at the first public meeting a lot of people recommended reducing the speed limits, which is something you can do with signage. But it's well known in the transportation industry that signage alone does not change behavior. So we are looking at ways to physically put countermeasures that don't compromise safety. So, in not all places is a speed hump or a speed table appropriate because a car could become airborne, just one example. So there are some countermeasures that could be appropriate for this roadway, and we are going to be looking at some of those as one of the strategies. Yes, sir.
Hi. My name is Jeff Carroll. I'm from Guilford. My question is,
Watch your
we're
step,
looking
please.
at all these short hitter, quick things that we could do, and while signage may not change behavior, I think it also informs people who use the road like I do every day. There's one, count 'em, one sign that says bicycles might be on this road for the entire distance between Guilford and the Stony Creek package store. We could put some signs up pretty cheap.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought up cyclists that at the first public meeting, and also we have been receiving comments online. There is a large group of people that ride their bikes on the corridor and also who walk along the corridor. There are some places where there is no shoulder. Cyclists will tell you that the best thing, that the minimal that they want is some shoulder, a striped shoulder. There are places along the corridor where there is no striped shoulder, or where it's maybe only a few inches, which is not comfortable for cyclists. So we are looking at where along the corridor, again, that cross-section, where we could reduce lane widths. We currently are going down to an 11-foot lane width right now, which is something that I believe we have done in our last paving project along the corridor. In some places, that's not enough. I know that doesn't address signage specifically. Signage is something that we can and will consider as one of the strategies. Yes, please, go ahead, sorry.
I actually emailed you today. Hi, I'm Michelle DeLito. I live in Branford and Pine Orchard, and I just wanted to know, in your plan, will you be considering the impact of whatever you're going to be doing, how it affects private property at all? Not just the corridor, but private property as well?
Could you just elaborate or be specific on how we might impact private property and sort of drainage or?
Drainage and flooding. Actually, I live in Pine Orchard on the water in very pretty Pine Orchard, and I'm not worried about the ocean. I'm worried about Pine Orchard Road flooding coming to our yard. We have a foot of water in our yard every single time it rains because the water apparently from Pine Orchard Road comes down to an incline, and we're inundated with about a foot of water in a regular rain. So we've put as many drains as we can on our own property, about $30,000 worth of drainage, but we can't do anything about Pine Orchard Road, and we were hoping that maybe this plan, and I'm very happy that you're doing this, but I understand Guilford has that terrible problem going on 146 over the bridge. I don't know how you people even operate or live over there, but we can't even get out of our own house. So I understand what you're going through if there's an emergency and you have to get out, but if there's an emergency, I can't even get out of my own house. So I would appreciate knowing how this might impact private property.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a good question, and actually, at one of our last working group meetings, we spent most of the time talking about water. And at one point, we were just saying that we need to have a strategy for water, because there's all kinds of water issues on the corridor. There's inland flooding, there's increased precipitation, which we anticipate. We're already designing structures to accommodate higher volumes of water, which means higher velocities of water, and that's just from precipitation, which it sounds like the issue is you're having. We also have the water that's flooding under the structures, the bridge structures, where we can't raise those structures. They're low. We're looking at, potentially pump systems, sea level rise, storm surge. So we are looking at all of the different water strategies. It does sound and one of the things we came to at the last corridor working group is the state is going to, anytime we touch a state facility, we have to upgrade the drainage systems to accommodate the flood year that we're looking to design for. In this case, we actually don't have the elevation to accommodate some of our design standards, so we're looking at innovative ways that we can make sure that water passes. If the water that you're experiencing is coming from private property or is coming from a municipal road, to the extent that it does pass on the state facility, we will try to convey that water to a logical outfall. However,
Send it to my neighbor next week.
we don't want to do that. But one of the things we are going to consider, one of the things we talked about is, and this is important, is that the state's authority in our jurisdiction really ends at the right-of-way of the road. If there's water coming onto the road, we deal with the water and we try to pass it. There are some other opportunities for the municipalities to also have a hand in water. So there are some innovative stormwater management systems that municipalities can also they can also implement. So we are aware that I don't have an exact answer for what we could do with your property specifically, but yes, we are looking at precipitation, increased flooding, and what our opportunities are to convey that water across the road so that we minimize impacts to private property.
Thank you.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Leslie Johnson, a resident of Brantford, and ardent bicyclist and runner on 146 a lot of the times. I think one of my main concerns is I understand the safety of guardrails for cars not going off and ending in, in the swamp or something. But being a bicyclist, when there's areas where it's really narrow, and if you have to have a guardrail, there are so many times I felt like I've had to bail because a car comes so close to me, not giving me enough room. If there's a guardrail there, it pinches me, it catches me between a motor vehicle that I can't escape and the road. So, like I say, I understand the importance of having guardrails for the cars, but how do you try to balance that if there's not room to make enough of a big shoulder and escape route? So if cars are really in a narrow lane trying to push you over, how do you make sure that the cyclist or runner can get out of the way? And just very quickly, another issue kind of on 146 is we have a lot of little sports cars that are having a lot of fun on the road, and I understand that, or people trying to pass to go around, runners and stuff. And so many times, and I don't know how you would possibly solve this transportation-wise, but cars try to pass by going head-on smack into another car, being aggressive, with 2 feet to get back over. Terrifying. And my very last comment is at Indian Neck and 146, that is a place that really needs to be addressed fairly quickly, particularly in the summer with all the restaurants and the entertainment there. You've got walkers going on both sides of the road, again, no sidewalks, bicyclists, and the access into onto Indian Neck itself. If you're a bicyclist coming in towards downtown Brantford, the sight line is so poor on the other side that you think you're clear, and there's a car speeding along, and you can't
Adjust.
make a corner. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. That's that's something that we have been hearing. The specific question to the guide rail, I am not the guide rail expert, but we have been talking about guide rails extensively. There are certain areas along the corridor where we are required to have guide rails. One of the things that we are looking at is that shoulder that I talked about. So where can we give cyclists, a desired 4 feet of shoulder? That's going to be really difficult along this corridor. But one of the things that we are, and we did one of the focus groups we had. I don't know if you were part of it, but we did talk to a group of people who regularly ride their bicycle and walk along the corridor. And one of the things we're trying to do is identify pinch points along the corridor where you might have a blind curve or where there is no shoulders, so that we can start to see where the next time we come along the road and we are doing a project, can we accommodate a greater shoulder, and can we prioritize those particular sections when we have a project? I think one of the things you'll be happy to hear of, as Dan did mention it, we have a new, just a few months ago, we have a new Complete Streets and Engineering Directive. The Connecticut Department of Transportation adopted it. It's a really big deal. We are getting national accolades for it. It is going to increase the cost of most of our projects, but essentially it means that every project we do on a federal facility or state facility that uses federal funds, actually even state funds, does have to require accommodations for all users, so cyclists and pedestrians. There are a few cases where it can be exempt, but it's a really big deal for the state, and we're fortunate to have a commissioner who's very much supportive of increasing safety for all users. And for people who are close to the industry, you know, the fatalities on all roadways around the country, including Connecticut, are very high, and it's a combination of distracted driving, speeding, enforcement, and just behavior generally. So this is brand new, but you are going to start to see every single project including amenities for bicycle and pedestrians. So I don't know what exactly that looks like, but it's going to be part of every single design that the department undertakes from here on out.
Lane width also plays a part in that.
Yes, it does. Absolutely. Right. Anyone else, please? Yes, please.
Yes, my name's Tricia Bowen. I'm in Branford, and I was just curious, speed management you talk about. There's a section in Branford from the library, Kirkham Street, to, let's say, Starbucks, that intersection there. And it's very narrow in other areas of 146, but there it's very wide. And some people think it's 4 lanes, and they go very fast, and I don't know if that's on your agenda to look at how to, we don't have sidewalks Richlands forward to Starbucks, we have sidewalks to the library, but if there's any way to slow things down in that section.
So I'm not sure if there's anyone, Dan, or if anyone wants to talk to that specifically, but it would be good to, this is the first I've heard of that particular section, so I'd like to maybe just identify it on the map so that, because I don't think I've heard that specific location yet, and we'll see what we can do. We'll look at it.
There's definitely room for sidewalks, and if you narrow the lane a little bit, Perry Moresky Economic Development in Branford, but if you narrow the lane there, it would somewhat slow them down if somebody drives within the lanes.
Okay.
60 miles an hour, right?
I told you it was 59.
Yes, sir.
I'm Louis Makel from Guilford. We have a shop at 135 Leeds Island Road. I also live on Clabbert Hill. I have several concerns. One, Tim Sperry, is Tim Sperry here? Yeah, he pointed out that there's a Johns Hopkins study showing that narrower lanes are safer. Are you all aware of that?
Yes, our new standard is 11-foot lanes, which is a reduction from 12 feet. So that's our new standard, which is a new practice that we've only started doing over the last 4 to 5 years.
The road at 146 going along the shore is at 11 feet. Can that be narrowed to 10 feet?
I don't think so because of the truck traffic. I believe that we did talk about that at the working group meeting, and I believe to accommodate trucks, which we are federally required to accommodate trucks on any road that receives federal funding, we cannot go below 11 feet to accommodate trucks. The mirrors, so if I could just, a full-size bus and a full-size truck, when their mirrors are out, their large mirrors, they actually are 10 feet 6 inches. So theoretically, if 2 trucks were passing each other, their mirrors would hit.
Right, but balancing that against those situations where there is very little side lane for bikes, it seems to me that those are choices to be weighed when the bike has almost no space for itself. The other thing on my mind is, the other thing on my mind, I assume this is the microphone?
It is.
Is the intersection here at Water Street and Whitfield Street, coming across in front of Cilantro. I would like to see that have less road and more sidewalk, and particularly in front of Cilantro and partly in front of the marketplace, a much expanded sort of cafe space. That has recently been marked off, and there is 18 feet of macadam, which has been marked to exclude cars. So right now, that's a no man's land, which seems very wasteful for the town. And the intersection itself seems to me way more macadam than we need to have, particularly at the sort of 100% corner of the town of Guilford. And that earlier lady talked about the safety of no guardrails for the sake of, in some instances, for the biker, and that seems to me worth considering.
Thank you very much, and I did recognize when we came in, so we did meet, we did see those concepts earlier this week, and I believe that there is a traffic study that's going to get underway soon that we talked about, and that is a specific concept for that intersection that I believe could be part of the scope of the traffic study that's going to be looking at that area of the town. I don't know, Janice, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I believe that that's a fair statement that those concepts could be considered, or at least that intersection will be considered as part of that traffic study. Yes, sir.
Nick Rawlings, Guilford. You pointed out that in 20 years, you're expecting a 20-inch rise in water. What's happening is not happening too slowly. It's happening quickly. And I'm concerned that another study, this is an excellent study, but are you going to run out of time? Are you going to be able to get to the things that need getting to before you run out of both time and also money? Maybe the next administration or some other administration in another few years will decide to spend money elsewhere.
It's a valid point. It's hard to predict 20 years, but every year we do increase our inland flooding, our storm surge modeling to reflect increased heights. There may come a time where there's no engineering solution for the increased flooding, but in the meantime, we're going to continue to see what we can do to protect the road and the private property along it.
Don't run out of time.
I hear you. Yes, sir.
Hi, everybody. John Grathwold, Brantford. I just have a couple of questions. One, it wasn't clear to me if this is a planning process and there's no clear priorities of one thing over another, but you do have these resiliency issues going on along the areas of the road that are already being flooded, even prior to the next 20 inches over the next 20 years. And I'm no transportation engineer. I don't know how repeated regular flooding degrades road infrastructure. I imagine there might be some effect. Mm-hmm. So the question is, does that put something higher up on a list of priorities than something else that might be a good idea, but not, if the current flooding is already causing damage every time it floods on some, molecular level, accumulating a lot over a year or two, is that going to get it more on the priority? And then my second list, kind of related to flooding, is wouldn't it be easy to put in some sort of sensors and assign upstream and downstream of where the flooding is on either side of the road to say road is flooded? So you don't have to find that out by driving down there and then having to turn around and come back when other people are coming down and turning around and coming. It seems like it would be relatively cheap and relatively easy to, just an idea.
Good, that's a good idea.
Thanks.
So I'll start with the last part first. So that's an idea that we actually haven't heard before. I don't know if the Department of the Maintenance Districts have already thought about it. So some type of a driver alert system seems like a good idea to me. It's something that we could investigate to see if that's possible. There might be a relationship or a partnership with the town in terms of maintenance or who activates that sign in times of flooding. But in generally, your point about flooding and priorities is a good one. It's something that we struggle with all the time, which is why we have so much dedicated to water and flooding is because there's something called nuisance flooding, which, right? So, and along the shoreline in Connecticut with increasing storm surge and sea level rise, we're seeing more and more nuisance flooding. And maybe, 10 years ago, the road would be underwater for a half a day. Now that road's underwater for a day or 2 days, right? And there's a certain level of tolerance that people can tolerate, right? So a nuisance flooding, maybe you can drive through it after 4 hours. Maybe you can't drive through it all for 6 hours. Maybe that's not a problem when there's a alternate route, but if that's your only route, then that would be something of a priority. Similarly, if there's an emergency evacuation route, that's certainly something that we can't let happen. There can be no flooding on an emergency evacuation route. So all of those factors come into play in terms of how we're going to approach improving this road. And generally speaking, the state has not taken a position on some of the terms you hear. Are we hardening our shoreline infrastructure or are we retreating? I can tell you one thing, that the majority of the roads along the Connecticut shoreline, they were not meant to be levees. They were not meant to be dams. The tidal surge and the retreat of the water does have a significant impact on our roads, whether they're local roads or state roads. Someone has to pay for those. And there's conversations at the federal level about how much and how much do we continue to invest in protecting the shoreline and the private properties. That is far beyond the scope of our plan, but I do just want to acknowledge that we are aware of that. We don't have a solution for it, and in this case, we are focused on Route 146, and we're trying to identify where is it nuisance flooding, where is it storm surge, and what are the options based on where it is. But we are aware of the need.
Can you define the term nuisance flooding?
So I don't know if my definition is the codified definition of nuisance flooding, but generally we refer to it as something that happens on an irregular basis that is an inconvenience to travelers. And I made that up, but that's what I know it to be.
Just one last comment, much of the flooding on 146 is related to tides, and it's easily modelable.
Please come up to the podium. I can't hear them. I can't hear them either.
I think the gentleman was saying, I'll just paraphrase, most of the flooding is related to the tides, incoming and outgoing tides. Okay. Thank you. Okay, that generated some conversation. Let's start. I don't know who was first.
It's rain.
Go ahead. Yes, please come.
Penny Bellamy, I live in Branford. I am aware that that 146 is on the Register of Historic Places. And when I hear you talk about these federal guidelines for highways, I wonder if there is a conflict between those designations and whether you're aware of it and how you deal with it.
So fortunately, and I'm not going to put her on the spot, but we do have a member of the Connecticut. Would you like to address that question? So Catherine LaBella, she is with the State Historic Preservation Office, and sorry, I'll let you introduce yourself and take that one.
That's fine. Hi, I'm Catherine Labadea. I'm with the State Historic Preservation Office. I'm the staff archaeologist as well as the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer. That's a great question. So being listed on the National Register of Historic Places is honorary. So that means it doesn't come with requirements for preservation or protection. However, those protections do get invoked when the government is spending money. So since most of what will ever happen on Route 146 is going to involve federal money, it requires compliance with a law called Section 106, which is a regulation of the National Historic Preservation Act. And that will require consultation with our office and stakeholders who are interested in preserving the historic character. And what defines the historic character usually comes in the form of that National Register nomination. So the features that are identified in there become kind of the guidepost for when we're looking at projects. How is the project impacting that historic character? And there's various steps that we go about to define that, determine what it means, and come up with ways where we can avoid it or minimize it. And if we can't do either of those, then mitigate it. Did that answer your question?
Sounds like the engineering can overrule the historic place designation.
Not always. And so now I will add another layer on to that. Within the Transportation Act is something called Section 4F. It is probably the strongest piece of preservation legislation that exists, not just in our country, but in the world. And it will require, when you're using those federal dollars, the federal government has to demonstrate that there is absolutely no prudent and feasible alternative other than impacting this historic place. Does that help? And that is not to say in the end, that is not to say that in the end engineering cannot override that. I mean, I think threats to public health and safety would probably be the biggest hurdle to overcome. But I would hope that you find some satisfaction in that nothing is going to happen without there being a stop, look, listen.
Thank you.
And maybe just on that, I will add that we didn't mention it, I think I mentioned it at the beginning, but this is a state-recognized designated scenic road. One of the benefits of that is that every time there's in addition to being a place on the historic register, is that every time there's a transportation project undertaken on the road, it does go through the State Scenic Road Advisory Committee, which includes multiple landscape architects, and the charge is to try to mitigate impacts. So wherever there is a design alternative that we can use to mitigate an aesthetic impact, we will try to recommend that for the project to go forward. So not only you sort of get two checks, you get a check from the State Historic Preservation Office, and you also get a check from the State Scenic Road Advisory Committee. Yes, sir. Okay, yes, I'll go there next. Thank you.
Thank you for a very informative meeting this evening.
Thank you.
I'm Sid Gale, and I have two questions, and I'll just give them both in quick order. The first is recognizing that sea level rise is going to be a significant independent variable and a moving target over a period that you're planning for. What exactly is your planning time horizon? Over what period of time are you, number one, hoping to implement plans that come out of your process? And number two, as you implement those plans, what is the likely useful life of those efforts in terms of their engineering potential within the envelope of climate change impacts? That's question number one.
Oh, okay.
Question number two is, given that transportation issues, which are your primary focus, are so intertwined with environmental issues, how are you and DEEP working together to coordinate whatever goes forward from this process?
So in addition to having a representative from SHPO here, we also do have a representative from the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection on the corridor working group. Again, I'm not going to put you on the spot. I don't think there was a specific question to have you answer, but maybe if you just say hello. So we do have a member, so we are coordinating. So
we coordinate quite a bit, actually, project per project, yeah.
All the projects that we undertake are currently under the general permit for our maintenance activities. So we have a general permit that allows us to plow, do clearing along the right-of-way for invasive species. Anything beyond that general permit, we get a special permit for. So whenever we do something larger than maintenance, we get a special permit. All those permits go through the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, also known as DEEP. So everything we do on the roadway, every project goes through our environmental review and permitting process, and it also goes to DEEP. In terms of the design life or the useful life of the transportation assets, we call them, they're all a little bit different. So I'm not the pavement engineer or the bridge engineer, so I'll probably get this wrong, but I do know that bridges, not culverts, but bridges, we shoot for a 75 to 100 year design life. Pavements, I believe, are much less. They're either 10 to 20 years, if about 25 years. That's our target design life. And I would have to check on guide rails and signs in that. But generally speaking, when we design or build something, we're going to design it to its useful life, and we're going to project out, based on sea level rise, precipitation, what we project those increases to be over that design life. And we actually go one beyond that too, just to make sure that we're not designing to the minimum, but that we are building in some contingency to accommodate what could be an increase than what the projections are calling for. Yes, sir.
Hey, Jay. Good evening, everybody. My name is Joe Pandolfi, and I live at 185 Stony Creek Road. I've been there for 60-plus years, as well as my family. There's a few people here that I know have generations of over 100 years living on a homestead. I'm one of them. In our area, I'd like to know if there's going to be a project coming out from the DOT for flex rail safety. The current flex rail in front of our homestead is not very well. The surge stone riprap that they had put along the bank is currently washed out due to the flooding that comes over 146 during a heavy rainstorm. The corrugated pipes that are drainage systems that are going underneath 146 there are the old corrugated metal type, and the bottoms are all rotted out and the pipes are probably collapsed. And I worked for the DOT for 33 and a half years, and before I retired, it was a big thing for general supervisors to go out there and check these pipes and to see and to submit their findings forward so projects can come out. So I got a question: is a project coming out on the drainage for these corrugated pipes that go underneath 146, and is a flex rail project going to come out? Because I'll tell you one thing, when the water floods over the road due to a heavy rain, and the guys like to go real fast over this little hill and try to catch air with their cars, they're going to hydroplane, hit that flex rail, go right over the bank, and someone's going to get hurt. So safety is a big concern, as well as speed, especially in inclement weather. So we need to have projects come out, not just talk about things, but projects need to come out so we can address the safety issues. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I do know that the corrugated metal pipe, it sounds like maybe when you were at DOT, it was already started, but we are going statewide and looking at all of the corrugated metal pipes and trying to identify those that can be relined and those that can't are being replaced. I don't know about the status of an individual project on that road, but that's certainly something we can look into with maintenance and find out if there is currently a project scheduled. And just to clarify, flex rail, is that?
That's the W rail.
Okay, the W beam rail. Okay, thank you. Yes, go ahead. And just like, how many folks would like to still say? Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Jay Medlin, Medlin's Farm. Well, basically, I get up in the morning, I use the phone. Well, it's going to be full moon. What time is high tide? And I'm not going to get out of the farm because everyone knows it's flooded out. You don't go that way. And we get the people that drive their $100,000 electric cars through our road. It's just amazing. And if you do put a sign at Sawmill Road and Leeds Island Road, you're going to send them all Sawmill Road across a wooden bridge that's collapsing, which is owned by the town of Branford. So that's a failure right there. But I just wanted everyone to know that the state did a beautiful job. They bought a beautiful tractor, probably $100,000 with a mower on the back and a sickle bar on the side, and they're using it to cut the Phragmites back. Unfortunately, they lost it at 2 days old. It went in the swamp. It got sucked in by Brian Doherty's house, and they couldn't get it out. So they had to come down with a massive payloader to take this brand new $100,000 tractor out of this swamp that the whole road is collapsing. But I haven't seen any engineers go by and, looking at oh, what's the problem? Why did it swallow up our $100,000 tractor? So, you know, maybe in our lifetime, we'll see something done with the road, but that road hasn't been paved in almost 30 years. From the, I guess, the Guilford line to, I don't know, package store maybe. It's about 30 years since they've touched that road. So, and 3 weeks ago, I called the water company, said or called the police department, said the water company's got to be notified there's water shooting out of the road. Well, we go out tonight, and they're finally fixing the road at School Ground Road, or Stony Creek Road, at 6:30 at night. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. That's certainly too bad to hear about that tractor. I'll have to find out what the plan is with that.
Picture to prove it.
I believe you, I believe you. Yes, please. If you want to come up to the podium, please. Just watch your step on that cord, please.
Yep. Hi, I'm Jenny Glass, and I'm from Brantford. I'm a runner and a biker, and last year my husband was hit by a car on 146. Speed was a huge issue in that, and it's been a year, and for a year I've been waiting for a sign, anything, just try to calm the traffic and the speed, because I've been running on 146 for 30 years, and it's gotten so bad. And so anyway, I'd love to see a sign and in all kinds of traffic calming measures as soon as possible.
It's It's good to hear that. I will say I was not part of the study team that started in 2018, but I know at that time they were doing the corridor study, and that was a corridor study, and we'll say the sort of the bicycle voice and the pedestrian voice really wasn't there. So it is there through this process. We're happy to hear it, and we can certainly look to see if there's a sign option available. We have been hoping, just so you know, we've been hoping to wait till this process happens before we do improvements along the corridor. But if there is some low-hanging fruit that we can implement sooner than later, we absolutely will.
It feels like we're waiting. It feels terrible for me, because I don't want anybody else to get hurt. It feels terrible. It's been a year, and we really need to do something to slow people down.
Hey folks, Erin Alvey, Guilford resident. In addition to not only reducing the speed of automobiles on Route 146, as a cyclist, I would like to just not be in the way of cars. I don't like being in their way. They don't like me being in their way either. And the road is so sinuous and narrow to begin with that it's hard to, get out of the way. There is no shoulder. Even if there was a shoulder, there's still a lot of blind spots. There's still a lot of blind curves. So what I would like to see in this corridor management plan is really an emphasis on the separation of vehicles and pedestrians and cyclists, so that, the tension between these communities is reduced dramatically. Everybody can enjoy the scenic, historic nature without being in each other's way. And even if, the overall speed is reduced, there's still going to be someone in your way, and very minimal chances to safely pass. So when the time does come, they're going to be zipping around you anyway. And one thing that this data doesn't capture is the enormous amount of near misses or near hits, whatever you want to call it, that happen multiple times a day regularly. It's pretty much almost every interaction I see as a driver myself or as a cyclist myself on this is really, really scary. And I would just like the professionals, the engineers, and the planners to acknowledge that there's some data that we don't have, and that's kind of a good thing that there's not all these accidents. But if there's a way to integrate that into the planning, that'd be great. And then also, I would kind of plant the seed that there's certain things like that the possibilities are kind of endless. There's not necessarily we can't do this. It's we don't want to spend the money to do this. Certain options are going to cost more, like blasting bedrock is going to cost more than, you know, shrinking a lane width. But, you know, what is ultimately, what is the you know, there could be some really great long-term cost savings. There could be some really great economic stimulation from tourism and recreation, let alone quality of life and increased property values from having, you know, this green infrastructure that people really desire. And, you know, we can get creative with materials. You know, it doesn't have to be impermeable surface asphalt, but again, that could also drive up the cost short term. But, you know, just kind of thinking more of the long-term benefits and, you know, long-term savings in promoting that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Perry Maresca in Brantford. First off, I want to assure everybody from experience that these meetings, they do pay attention, because at the bridge by Lenny's that is still under construction, almost done, when they came to the public, there was one sidewalk on one side of the road, and we said we need two, because there's a lot of businesses there and people are walking from business to business. So they listened, and there's sidewalks on both sides of the road. On that topic, with the sidewalks, a gentleman earlier mentioned the area from at least Indian Neck Avenue down to Lenny's and then onto the other side to Lyman Avenue where the water starts. Definitely sidewalks there, and that's low hanging fruit because there is room there, and you could probably get a sidewalk and a bike lane in that area without blasting any rock. To the point before about the, one woman talked about guardrails, then we just talked about your husband's accident, and then again with the guardrails. One of the thoughts that when we had some of these meetings was if we're going to have an area where we're going to improve the road, maybe raise the road, do something, whatever the case is, and we need sidewalk or bike lane, possibly to not destroy the beauty of the road, you have a sidewalk and or bike lane on the other side of the guardrail below the level of the ground. So now you're protecting the bicyclist, you're protecting the runner, and you're also not getting obstructed by having this huge sidewalk or bike lane as part of now what makes the road look larger in destroying some of the beauty that the road has. Going to be areas where there's sharp curves and there's ledge right out there. Well, that's the higher fruit. We have to worry about that afterwards. But I think if we do something like this in some of the areas, that's fine. And then also, let's get a couple of signs out there for the time being. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you both for your comments. I do want to address what you said. The separated bike lane facility is the gold standard. The good news is that we do, because of this new engineering complete streets directive, we are going to look and see if we can accommodate the gold standard. If we can't, we're going to see what we can accommodate, and cost will not be a factor. We will not say no because of cost. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, we haven't been over here for a while. If you could please come up to the podium, please.
Hi everybody, I'm Julia. I live in Madison, but I spend a lot of time in Guilford and Brantford. I'm curious from an implementation standpoint if you're going to tier certain feedback areas that you're getting as like red, yellow, green as priority areas, mid-priority or lower priority. I think that would be wise. I think taking into account all these different anecdotal places along the path where we have issues, it'd be important to have a sense of where those high priority areas are. So I'm curious, do you have something like that? Or are you planning on implementing it?
So in terms of priority locations, and we touched a little bit on this earlier, we think that it's going to come as the roadway needs improvement. So based on where the transportation project is, we're going to start with that area first. So if it's a culvert replacement, we're going to start there. We're going to try to incorporate as many strategies as we can into that project. If it ends up being a paving project, we're going to look at as many strategies we can include in the paving project. But we're not going to go through the corridor and identify priorities outside of the a need-based approach to the project. there's already a need to replace several structures on the corridor, so bridges and culverts are probably going to come up first. However, you do bring up a good point. One of the things we talked about at the corridor working group is there are going to be, and I call them origin and destination pairings. There are areas along the corridor where you might have a community or neighborhood where children and kids and people walk across Route 146 to get to another location. That's certainly an area where we want to see, okay, we know that there's already an existing flow of people and bicycles and transportation, so when we work on that area, we're going to try to prioritize those places where there's a concentration of people and cyclists and where there's potential conflict, including speed management. But the strategies themselves are not going to be prioritized among themselves. Thank you. All right, it's a little after 7:30. We're going to go till 8 o'clock, so I'm going to try to just get through as many as I can until 8 o'clock. Yes, please. You've been very patient.
Hi, I'm Eunice Mahler from Brantford. So I have one point I want to make beforehand in case you guys haven't heard this, but after the COVID years, there were more and more pedestrian fatalities. 25 miles an hour is when there's a chance that a pedestrian, and I take it probably a bicyclist, can live. So 2 points that I want to make. What about even slower rates all the way across? And if the trucks have to be on the road, how about some places where we have only one lane? Lights, because there are places that I've been around in the United States where this works. You have one lane, you have a traffic light, and that lets the truck go through, but you can slow everybody down and give a separation to the bicyclists and to the pedestrians. And maybe have it all on one side so that they have the maximum amount of room, and let the cars have their space, but they don't need to go fast.
Right, that's an interesting concept. I am not a traffic engineer, but I will tell you that nothing is off the table right now. So what you're saying is something we can certainly take back to the working group. We do have traffic engineers on the working group. If that's an option that we could consider, we certainly could. But there might be innovative strategies, like you said, that we could do along the corridor to accomplish that. Maybe that's not the exact one, but.
And there are towns and cities around the states that are slowing down in their own
Oh.
towns to 15 miles
Yeah.
an hour.
I will say there was legislation passed last year that does allow for speed reduction for municipalities down to 20 miles an hour, but you are exactly right. Every mile an hour over 20 miles an hour does increase the risk of fatalities and serious injury over 20 miles an hour. But there is legislation that does allow municipalities to request a reduction in speed limit. However, I do just want to caution that signage alone will not be effective. So I want to come back to that because signage is a piece of the solution, but it is not a fail-safe by any means. Yes, please. And there's three, we're just going to go one in a row. So if you could go, and then you next, and then three, and then we will come back to the middle. Okay? All right. Thank you.
Kim Granberry, Guilford. I have a question. It's more specific to Guilford, and it's relative to federal and state funding. And is federal and state funding so important that we can't protect a road that was a local road until 1919? Is there anybody in the room who thinks that a lot of these problems could maybe be solved better by having Route 146 go back into Guilford's jurisdiction? That's my question.
So it's a good question. We have, like I said, we have 15,000 lane miles throughout the state. At one time, this could have been a regional, interregional connection. Now it is redundant to Route 1. So it is a good question. There's the Department of Transportation gives roads back to municipalities regularly. There's a process in place to do that. It's not something we are considering now, but there may come a time where the necessary standards that we design roads to is something that neither community wants to consider, and perhaps the communities would want to, it would be something that's official. It goes through both boards, Board of Aldermen, First Selectmen. It's an official act, and we do that. But currently, right now, Route 146 is redundant to State Route 1, which does serve a regional interstate purpose.
It's more redundant than Route 80?
But they're somewhat, I would imagine Route 80 has a higher average daily traffic, but it's relative.
Does that get rid of trucks then?
So the question was, will that get rid of trucks? Was that your question? My office also does the statewide freight plan. And so trucks is interesting because I assume everyone is enjoying Amazon and UPS and just-in-time delivery. Those are trucks as well. We are required by federal law to accommodate all modes of vehicles, including trucks. Municipalities generally, I don't know if they prohibit trucks. We see a lot of municipalities saying no through trucks, but yet communities want their Amazon packages delivered. So we are not going to prohibit trucks as a state facility. Sir, did you still want to say something?
Yeah. So just to sort of go on that, my name's Paul DiNocenzo. I live on 146 in Guilford. To just go along with that, so there's no way of reducing the truck traffic. And the reason I ask is this, because it seems like a lot of the problems that are there relative to flooding, lane size, have to do with providing access to trucks. Look, I understand trucks are part of the thing. And, you know, historically, Matt was telling me that, 146 was historically a truck lane. That's how people got in things in and out. But on the other hand, if you look at it from the standpoint, we live between the two railroad bridges, and they both can't be changed because the height level has to be required to let a truck through. But if we change that, then we can raise the road to affect the flooding, because then we don't have to get a 15-foot truck through the bridge. So there is some aspects of that that would be helpful for a lot of the other problems, as opposed to trying to pump water out when it floods. We could just raise the bridge. So we live just towards Guilford of the short bridge that floods all the time it rains. And they can't do much of that. It's like literally on the water. It's like a beach practically. So the only thing you can do is raise that road. And that would be, you could allow that if you didn't have to have the height. I mean, we moved here about 5 years ago, and we had a giant moving truck, and they had to come in for the Brantford side because the other one was too low. So I understand the issues, but you still can go Moose Hill Road and get into those areas without having to go under those bridges. So anyway, that's one thing. The other thing I wanted to ask about is, because we live on 146, what's the issue with expanding the road for bike lanes? Is this eminent domain? Is that going to be part of what's going on? Or how much room is there on both sides of 146 that is part of the corridor?
It's a good question. So the right-of-way varies along the corridor, but one of the strategies is for us to confirm the right-of-way boundaries. It's an old corridor. There's old private properties. We have a center line, and we have an estimated width of the right-of-way that we maintain. But one of the strategies is to identify specifically the corridor to figure out where we have right-of-way. There is no prohibition to widening. We widen roads all the time. But I will tell you, there is a longstanding sentiment of the community that they would prefer not to see the road widened. Widening the road does increase speeds historically, and I think there's some concern that we're going to increase speeds. However, I will say that there are a lot of opportunities for what we call sliver widening, where we could accommodate additional bike lane or where we could accommodate additional shoulder, but the Department of Transportation is not opposed to widening. But like I said, we're in this process to work with both municipalities so that when we do come to the municipality with a project, we don't want anyone to be surprised where they see that we need to take 3 additional feet in order to accommodate a bike lane. So, and again, it's important to remember that the 14-mile corridor isn't the same. So there might be areas that can currently accommodate a bike lane or a sidewalk with the existing right-of-way, but there might be other areas where we're going to need to take some land, which we do all the time, but it's generally our process. We don't want the communities to be surprised. Right. We certainly don't want the private property owners to be surprised that we need to take some of their land in order to accommodate a road. And I will say that part of the reason we're having this process is because we don't want to just hear from the traveling public in their cars. We also want to hear from the people who walk and cycle, because there are different priorities, and when it comes to transportation, we don't always get consensus. We're not always going for 100% consensus. We realize that it's very difficult to get 100% consensus, but we certainly want to get as close to consensus as we possibly can. If we can get to 80% or 85%, if we can get 90% of the people to be happy with the project, that's a win for us. You know, I don't want to set an unreasonable expectation, but we are hoping that we can come out of this process with some level of compromise, some level of consensus, so that everyone knows that when the DOT comes through this corridor, we're going to try to reduce lanes where we can. We're going to try to keep existing historic structures, stone walls. We're going to try to preserve scenic vistas, and we're going to try to accommodate as many users as safely as we can in the corridor. I know that sounds like a lot. It does seem like a tall order, but we're all here trying to do that.
Yeah, and one last question. You had said about a timeline. So what are we really looking at? We're going to have another meeting, and then we'll have another meeting in the spring, and you said that's sort of when the decisions would be made?
Well,
so how much input do we have in that decision-making process before they say, okay, this is what we're going to do?
I'm glad you brought that up. It's going to bring us full circle. We're running out of time. There's a couple of, I think there's 2 more people that want to say something, right? So we're going to let you come up as a reminder. So the strategies that you have, there is a website. These are the strategies that we're going to carry forward through the rest of the process until the spring. We would like people who have the interest and the time to look at them, see if we've missed something, see if we got something wrong, see if we don't have a strategy. The Corridor Working Group, I will say, has been very engaged. I think they do represent a good cross-section of both communities. So I think we're pretty close, but by all means, let us know if you think that we're missing something. Come springtime, we hope to have a draft final report that will be draft final. And once that's done, that is going to become our corridor management plan. And every single time the department has a project along this corridor, we're going to go to this document. Every single project engineer is going to look at it and say, the community is interested in looking at considerations for alternate guide rail. They're looking for alternatives to increase safety. And actually, we're doing this for every project now with the new directive. We're going to be looking at accommodations for cyclists and pedestrians on all of our projects, drainage, flooding. These are all going to be something that all of the design engineers currently look at. This is going to become somewhat it will become a guide for every project engineer to use. And it also gives us the ability to maybe step outside our normal standards that we would normally say, this is the standard, we're not going to deviate. In this case, this process is going to give those design engineers in the department the ability to maybe look at some mitigating design alternatives to accommodate what's in this plan. So it's going to be, it will be very important. It's unique within the state. We only have one other corridor management plan like this in the state, and it's Route 169, and it's a nationally recognized scenic byway.
Daniel had public survey on one of the slides, and my question is, how is the public going to be addressed to get their input in that survey? It was listed under the things that were going to happen.
That's a good question. I'm glad you brought it up. We don't have the survey drafted yet. We were hoping to have this meeting to maybe inform some of the things that we need to get back out to the community, so where we heard concerns. So we didn't want to prepare the survey on just the strategies you see, because we did hear some things tonight. We might want to change that survey. The survey is going to come about. We don't have a timeline, but it's going to be before the spring. So sometime this winter, you'll get a survey. However you heard about the meeting tonight is how you're going to hear about the survey. If you signed up on the sign-in sheet, you will get an email saying, please participate in the survey. I know that some of the state representatives or the state senator sent out a blast. All those channels of communication are going to be the same. So we are going to try to get it to as many people as possible. And you actually don't need to wait for the survey. If you can go to the website, we have a comment form. You can submit comments today, tonight, tomorrow. There's no timeline to stop submitting comments. 2 more, and then we're going to wrap up, everyone.
I'm Beth Mariotti, and I live in Guilford, very close to the crabbing hole on 146. I feel really nervous talking to all of you. This has been overwhelming. I don't know how you guys put all this together, and I don't see how you can really do almost any of it, because lots of it is conflicting. I understand you have a very hard job ahead of you. It's hard to keep a historic road and put a whole other lane in for bikes. I understand that, but I really want to emphasize what Jen was saying earlier, that there are some things that are really critical that they happen soon. There's tons and tons of things in this report, and it will go on for a long time as you try to consider it. But when you drive this road every day, and I don't know if you do, I don't know where you live, but if you don't, I would encourage you to. It's beautiful, but it's also dangerous. And the biking issue, I heard you say in response to her comments, that this wasn't, the biking and pedestrian maybe wasn't as vocal, and now it is, and you're including it more. But the letter that I wrote in response to the last SCROG report was that actually in 2017, SCROG did specifically a biking and pedestrian plan for the corridor. And one of their first recommendations was to gather more data. That was 2017. In 2021, when they did the next report, they still hadn't gathered the data. And what's the Stephen Dudley, is that the name of the deputy director? He said, Route 146 is problematic with regard to bike traffic. There's no question about that. It has been a designated bike route on state maps in the past, and that in many respects means it's a take your life in your own hands situation when it comes to regard to the traffic that goes through there. For years it has been on the radar, and dangerous things happen, and things that people don't report happen. There needs to be a way that the data is gathered so we know where those things are happening would really be helpful to you. And again, if you drive it every day, you see it all the time. But if you're putting together a report like this and you're counting on data, it's not as obvious. So I just really want to emphasize that.
Thank you. So I did ride my bike along the corridor. It is a nice ride, except for it is scary, particularly where two cars want to crash. I will say the 2017 report, and I wasn't part of that team, so I don't know the specifics, but I do know that at some point the department and the Council of Governments that were conducting the report stopped because it seemed that the report was going in a direction that neither municipality were happy with. So some of the findings, and so there was a pivot, and the pivot was to say, okay, and that's why it's important, and this, for folks not doing this every day, it may not make a lot of sense, but there's a difference between a corridor study and a corridor management plan. A corridor study will go through the corridor and identify needs and deficiencies and come up with alternatives and concepts for the corridor, and they will prioritize those. What we heard, and we heard this through elected officials, and there were some state representatives that were very vocal and said the communities really need to be involved with this process, which is why we're undertaking this process. But the idea of a corridor management plan is that we're not going to start with identifying the solutions. We're going to start with identifying all of the issues along the corridor and then try to come up with ways that we can achieve as many of those objectives with every project that we undertake, rather than looking at a project by project approach. I will say that once we're done with this, there are a backlog of projects that need to happen, and we are waiting for this process to happen before we start advancing those projects. They're not going to happen day one. The plan's not going to be done, and we're going to have projects out the door. There probably actually are some projects already ready to go. But again, that's going to be a conversation. They will go through the process. We will have public meetings on the process, on each project, and the communities will both be aware of those. And they should reflect everything that is included in the plan and that you've been a part of in the corridor working group over the last 7 months. We have time for one more question. Go ahead, please.
My name is Martha Buck. I'm a summer resident of Guilford, and I live at 280 Leeds Island Road. I want to speak to two issues, but they both have to do with reducing the speed limit. Okay, if you're coming from the west, if you're coming from Branford, you pass Moose Hill Road and Shell Beach Road, and there's a long flat, and then you go over a rise. My driveway is right under that rise. It's a blind driveway. Cars get up speed. I would say 45 is more typical than 35. Okay, so it's a very dangerous driveway. I've been there since 2008, and I can't tell you the number of near misses I've had. I cannot come out and turn west anymore. That is much too dangerous. I have to turn right, go down over the causeway, turn around, and then go west, okay? So that's one issue. Some of you have heard about my dangerous driveway before because I talked about it at that meeting about the subdivision that wanted to go in. My other issue is I would like to speak on behalf of all the crabbers. On a good weekend in the summer, there could be, over the course of the day, 100 people using that causeway area as a crabbing spot. The speed limit is 35 miles an hour. There are children, there are people unloading boats. It's a wonderful, wonderful place. I think a lot of the people, you see a lot of different ethnicities. I think a lot of them are not Brantford or Guilford residents, but they are attracted to that spot. If you're coming from the east, you pass Breakfast Woodworks, you go around a turn, there's a sign there, 35 miles an hour. At a recreation area, it makes no sense at all. So, I mean, I really do think it's a miracle that there hasn't been a serious accident. And I also, one last thing I have to say is I would never ride a bike on 146.
All right, I just want to say something. I hate to.
No question.
Okay.
Good evening. I have preparetoprotect.org, and I live on Leeds Island Road. I'm Deborah Levi. And what I'm seeing there is that the road, it's not large enough for bikes and cars, point blank. You can't do it. The owners of homes, I don't believe are going to like the idea that you're going to take land. I believe things need to be separated. Now you have, what is the Greenway Trail, right? You have a Greenway Trail for hikers. We need something for bikers, as Perry said. I agree with Perry. We need to do something for the bikers that are separate from the road. Whether, even if it's a short biking trail that connects onto Leeds Island Road, or if you can do a bike trail somehow on the left, the right, I'm not sure how that would work, especially with the flooding problems. But I think things need to be separated. I'm a biker, I'm a hiker. So on that road, it's very tough. I've gone in the morning biking, in the evening, in the afternoon, whatever, and I've come across a lot of things. Even people coming out of driveways, you have to be careful. I also want to say that where the package store is, that intersection where the package store is, they need a sign there, okay, that says Scenic Highway. Underneath the Scenic Highway, there also needs to be bikers, caution. Walkers, bikers, however they're going to put the sign there. But it should be in that intersection where the tourists come in from 56. They will also come on the other road, which is at Stony Creek Road. There needs to be a great sign somewhere that says it all. Now you have deer crossing, which is a problem now. Isn't it mating season, Jay? Okay, so we're, and a lot of cars are getting, it's very dangerous. So I believe that the signs are now, not later. We need the signs now. Scenic Highway at the beginning, and from Guilford Scenic Highway. Both ends, because Brantford and Guilford is connected, right, by the Scenic Highway. One in Guilford, one in Brantford, and everything should be in that one sign underneath, so that we are safe. That's it. Let's get a bike lane somewhere and work on that. I just don't see you taking people's property and pushing it out. Leave the road, whatever you have to do, maybe a little, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to conclude tonight's meeting. We'll be around for a little while if people want to talk. Thank you everyone for coming. We will be distributing information. So I'm happy to see all the interest. It's good. Thank you. Thank you very much.